Okay, but I took a piece of Cotoneaster as like a little bit of a demo. Well, why don't I just run through all the different sort of supplies here that we've got? But I've just got like regular hand pruners. We have here, like, this is a grafting knife. You could use a pocket knife. The difference between a grafting knife and a pocket knife is that the bevel is only on one side of this. Like, it's totally flat on the one, and then it's beveled on the other. And that's just so that, like, when you're cutting, like, as an example, if you're cutting a piece of, like, rootstock in two, it doesn't, like, travel, like, one way or the other. It just kind of cuts straight down. You could use a regular pocket knife if it was sharp enough. I do most of the work with this one here. This little knife is very similar. It has this little piece here for bud grafting, and so you can actually just like take a single bud off of a plant and graft it on. I've played around with that a little bit. We're going to be doing like a different style today. And then I have here like grafting wax, but it's just, if you feel it, it's just paraffin wax. It stretches. It's not sticky. Like it sort of sticks to itself. But I'll pass that around. And then we have sort of like what we're grafting is like, these are a couple pear varieties here. So these are Russian pears. There's Marshall Zukov and Favoritica. And these were collected while the plant was dormant. So these were taken sometime between like November and typically March, and then put into like a Ziploc bag like this, often with a little bit of just like moist napkin or paper towel, just to keep it from drying out, and then just like thrown in a crisper. And so they've been there for months. So these sticks, these scions, still think it's winter, right? They haven't leafed out yet. It's been cold the entire time. Versus this here, which has been outside, we're going to imagine that this is like attached to, like, growing out of the ground. This here would be our like rootstock or our tree that we're grafting onto. And so this is awake, right? It's actively sending nutrients up and pushing leaves. This here is totally dormant. And that's kind of the key here, is if we can attach the scion onto our rootstock, and the rootstock is actively feeding it, as this wakes up, it can heal and then start leafing out, and basically you've now attached it. It has to be compatible, like generally like pears on pears, apples on apples, cherries on cherries. But you can sometimes get some weird things, like pears and Cotoneaster, which is what this is, are in the Rosaceae family, and they're somewhat compatible. I guess Saskatoons you can sometimes put on this as well. Prunus, like cherries and plums and apricots and peaches, are all closely related, so there's often lots of like intercompatible grafts there. But sticking like a prunus onto a like a malus, so like putting a cherry on an apple won't work. But this is a sort of one of those weird exceptions. A pear on a Cotoneaster, two totally different genuses, same family. The other weird one I've heard is I've seen people graft pear onto Almer cherry.
Huh.
So like another weird like intergenus graft. I guess it's just something about the way that the living cells kind of line up is just works. So like on that note, I think this is like a decent example. I might cut it flat. So it's really weird, but on a like a woody plant, like a tree, the bark is typically dead cells. And then the wood on the inside is also typically dead cells. And the part that's living is just this like little green layer between the wood and the bark. And what it's doing is it's like adding cells to the center, which is like how you get your growth rings. And then it adds cells to the bark as well. And the bark gets thicker, which is why the bark on like a young plant looks different than a bark on an old plant. And then sometimes the bark like flakes off and sometimes it like just builds up. But like in a weird way, trees are sort of like coral reefs where it keeps building on itself. But it's just that like living tissue, which also explains why like all you have to do to kill a tree is just remove the bark, like that living tissue all the way around, and it can't send nutrients up or down. Like that xylem and phloem is like in that living tissue there. You can also do weird things though. So like as an example, the xylem that's sending like water and nutrients up is a little bit further into that wood than the phloem, which is like sending sugars down. And so you can do weird things like if you take a branch of a tree and you were to remove the bark, we're getting outside of the world of grafting here, but if we were to remove this, so I've seen people do this. So we've cut off nutrients heading down, but this tissue here, there is some xylem in there that will still send water up. Now, that's a lot of growth on there, so probably not a lot to support that if this was in the ground. But I've seen people take like a Ziploc bag. Let's imagine this is a Ziploc bag.
Oh yeah.
Like full of soil.
I saw somebody on TikTok do that.
And then wrap it.
Yeah, no, I've seen that a lot of those on little clips online.
Wrap it in tin foil just so that it doesn't like get too hot or cook it. And it's air layering. And if you come back down the line, this often will have sent out a bunch of roots, and then you cut it off and you can go and you can plant your new tree.
Yeah,
right?
I've seen lots of clips of that. Yeah.
So some like kind of cool things you can do there. The big thing is, so like let's there's a couple different grafts that we'll do today. The best time to graft, like we're kind of getting a little late in the season here. The best time is when these little leaves are just starting to push, like when they're just opening up. That's kind of ideal. But let's assume, okay, here's what we're gonna do. Let's assume that this is our like actual tree that's growing, like that's our rootstock, and let's assume that this is our scion. It's been in the fridge. Now, you saw me just take it off. One graft that we're gonna do is ideally you partner up the rootstock, the diameter of the rootstock with the diameter of the scion. I did an amazing job.
It's almost like it's from the same plant.
It's like perfect, guys.
This is why you're teaching.
I am so good at this. You only technically need a single like growing point. Like this has like this is where we're gonna get leaves, right? You technically only need one, but I like to go 2 or 3. And so one graft that we can do is we can take our grafting knife. I will say that I have like really cut myself grafting in the past. And it's because so many of the grafts are like, or so many of the cuts like require like pulling towards you.
Just not recommended.
It's not recommended. I suppose I could like even on this, like actually that's probably not a bad idea, but like I guess I could try to go this way. So one graft that we can try is we're gonna basically make a V out of the scion, and we wiggle our grafting knife. We can, this is where I'm always worried about cutting myself, but we can basically slide down through the middle. And this is where that like, the fact that the grafting knife is only beveled on one side generally keeps it from traveling, though it still does a little bit. But I'm gonna take this, and I like to try to do it in sort of smooth strokes if I can. That's not terrible. I'm gonna maybe just clean up that bottom a little bit. And what we would do is we need to line up the living tissue, right? The only thing that matters is that green living tissue, the part that is alive, is lined up on both of them. It doesn't even need to line up on both sides. This rootstock here, if it was much bigger, as long as we line this up on one side and it's firmly in place, like we've got good contact, then that graft stands a chance to take. And then the last thing we would do is, I mean, I've seen people do like tie a rubber band or use electrical tape. I've used electrical tape in the past. The downside with electrical tape is I find when I'm unwrapping it, it like takes half the bark with it. And what's nice about this is it's just like, it's self-adhesive and it's soft enough that the buds will actually grow through it. But what I really want is to get,
so it's pretty tight.
Yes, yeah, I really want to get that as tight as I can. The grafting tape will rip if you pull too hard, but I'm trying to like stretch it at each point. And we're gonna get that good contact. And you could technically stop here, but, and just in order to save grafting wax or grafting tape, what I like to do is actually bring it all the way up. If it dries out before it's like actively being fed, it's dead. And so that's usually what the graft looks like. But that's essentially graft. So like it's fairly, it's fairly tight in there. So once again, let's imagine, so there's something called a bud graft too. We could try to do a bud graft here. I've done this a lot less, but I think we can get the theory in. So technically all we need is to graft a single bud onto rootstock. And if we can get that bud to take, everything that grows from it will be that grafted plant. And so there's ways of like just grafting. Let's cut towards you.
When's your birthday?
So, technically if we take something like this, if we can get it out, and we cut an equivalent piece into our rootstock, and we match it, and that takes, we've successfully grafted.
So you just put that little bud onto the...
Yeah, so let's imagine that I ended up cutting that equivalent piece here on my rootstock.
Right.
Really cheating. It doesn't even need, it can be anywhere, right? It doesn't need to be like where another bud was. You can wrap that there and it will take. You can even take like just easy. Yeah, there's lots of ways of doing it. Like you could even just like take out a little square or rectangular bit of just the bark. Like you don't need to take any of the wood with it. And if we can pull that off and cut an equivalent rectangle into our, it's not quite.
With the bud on it.
With the bud on it. Yeah, this has to have the bud on it. Then we can get it to, we can graft it that way. Couple things is I try not to touch where I've cut because you can get like the oils on your hands can clog up the xylem and phloem. The other thing too is like later in the season. So right now we're using this like dormant wood, right? But later in the season, you can take something, you could take this bud here and you can graft it, do a bud graft onto a plant, and it won't do anything for the season, but the following year it will shoot. So there's like all kinds of variations of it. Tons of things that we can do. The other one that I will maybe suggest, and this is going to be hard to show, I'm going to try to take our biggest piece here, and I'm going to try to take like a small piece just to sort of show like grafting, like two different sizes. And I actually really like this graft. So this would be a bark graft. So we've like shrunken everything down. Let's imagine that this scion is actually like this, and that this here is like, I don't know, anywhere from like a half an inch to, I don't know, could be as big as you want. What you would do is on your scion, let's make sure up is up. On the scion, I would take, you could really do, you know, just one little bit like that, but I'll sometimes actually turn it at a slight angle, and it's tough with this little piece, and make like a little bit of a wedge. And then if you take your bark and pry it a little bit just so that it slips like that. Oh my God, I lost the scion. What you can do is you can slide this in there so that we get nice contact there. Like I'll pass that around actually. And then you would wrap that. So you'd start at the bottom and you'd wrap the whole thing. And that's like a really easy graft because you're not like trying to match up like the, you know, the like 2 V's or, you know, you're just, and then as it gets bigger, basically like at a certain point, it becomes less and less obvious that there was ever sort of a graft there. It's still pretty obvious on my tree because I like, you know, I hacked it off to like stumps like this. But.
And how many different types of scions did you put
I
on?
put 2 on each. So like on each stump, I put like 2 of the same type.
Okay.
Right.
2 on. So there's
Yeah.
6 different types.
Yeah, you could go over here. Like we could do another cut over here, and we could slide another one in on the other side, which also means that we've doubled the
Thanks, birds.
chances of our graft taking, right? Because if all you need is one of them to take, and you could cut the other one off. But most fruit trees are grafted because, like, this is a clone. Like, I guess a couple things. One is it's hard to propagate a lot of fruit trees. Like if you collect apple if you collect apple or pear or plum scions and you stick these in the ground to try and root them, the success rate is really low. Like they're hard to root. But they're easy to start from seed. But when you start from seed, it's just like you have no idea what you're going to get. And so people will grow apples from seed or fruit from seed, and then they will graft the varieties that they want, and then you get what you grafted onto it, right? So it's a clone. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do a bark graft, and we're going to take it down fairly low.
I want raspberry canes. Raspberry canes.
I will take them.
Okay. So I'm gonna make my little bark graft here. We'll do the.
They started to leaf out.
So I was able to like pull that open, and then let's do a Marshall Zukov pear.
We're thinning them out next Tuesday. So I was like, any that get ripped up, I will take and rehoe.
Yeah, sweet.
I'm ripping them up.
Okay.
So this is the bark graft you're doing?
So it's a bark graft, and I'm gonna try to cut this into like a sliver. And so it's sort of like a wedge shaped thing.
Yeah.
I might try to just like extend it up a little bit higher actually. Just because like the longer it is, the more
Hi, buddy.
Ball's over there.
Okay. So I'm gonna take it, and I've got this. It's like slipped open, and I'm just gonna slide it in between the two. I don't know if I made this deep enough. Okay. The nice thing about this graft is it's kind of hard not to have good lineup of the bark because you're sort of like coming at it like perpendicularly. But yeah, I don't know if folks want to take a closer look at that before it gets wrapped.
Video shot of it. There we go.
To keep it from drying out.
Yeah, and actually, like, you should see moisture, like little like condensation and stuff in the inside eventually, like after a couple days, and the graft should start growing. Like you should see some life in it within a couple weeks. And the nice thing about
Wow, that's not very long.
and the nice thing about this grafting tape is that it just grows. The buds just grow right through it. So that's just. Let's graft it on and we'll see what happens. And the tighter we can get this, the better. Yeah.
How do you have a magnolia tree growing in Edmonton?
I don't know. It hasn't opened. So yeah, we can have. Let's do two on this. Like typically, what I'll do is I'll cut off the bottom for like a fresh bottom, and then this is that weird graft again. That. Jeez.
It's okay, there's lots of them.
So I grafted into the moldy ones. Yeah, so something like this that we can just sort of slip in.
And you know it's the bottom because this is coming up. Like
Yeah,
that.
that's right. That's a good point. These little buds are just sort of
Pointing out.
pointing upwards. Yeah. Yeah, and actually like just like turn it so that it's fully like that, and then just push it.
Oh, I see.
And then if you give it a little bit of a turn,
Right.
often it'll just.
Nicely done.
That's right. So slip that in. There you go. That looks good. Yeah, like I'm pretty happy with that. Okay.
Okay, so this is quite like wide here. So
Yeah.
as far as like going around between these guys.
Yeah, it might like you could try to
Oh, this way. Okay.
give it a little bit of a
Okay.
and even like.
I'm gonna. Thank you.
It helps if I get my fingers out of the way here for you though.
Okay. Psych.
Or what if you even came right through the middle?
Into the middle.
What's that? Oh, thanks.
Yeah, even that's pretty good. And then we can wrap each of those individually.
Yeah.
There's something called grafting. Like I keep calling this grafting wax. It's wax and it's technically a grafting tape.
Mhm.
There is something called grafting wax. And I'm sure there's lots of different varieties of it, but I tried one once and I just found it such a sticky mess that I was like, never again. This the tape is just, yeah, this paraffin tape is so good.
Yeah, it's really.
It just sticks to nothing but itself. It's kind of stretchy. It's soft enough that the just buds grow through it.
The fact that the buds go through it is standing.
Yeah. And it eventually just kind of like falls off. I've never even really gone out of the way to remove it. Just as it grows, it tends to crack down one side and peel off.
It's kind of hard to like trusting that it feels like it's gonna stick to itself because it feels like
Yeah,
it
it
doesn't
shouldn't.
stick to your fingers, and it's just like what it is.
Cool.
What's that, Jordy?
Flower.
Maybe just do that.
Yeah. There we go. Yay!
That looks very funny.
So this is Edmonton Boris, And these ones over here were 2 Honeycrisp. Where were they? Right here.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
There and there. It does, yeah, tree robot. Okay. I think I'm probably gonna stop the live stream. So everybody wave to the live stream.
Say bye, Jody. Thanks for
Thanks for
watching,
coming.
everybody. Subscribe.
Subscribe.